Hi, I'm Carys
And I'm Gary Younge.
Every week, Gary and I will be talking about the stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that go completely under the radar and are not being talked about enough.
This is Over the Top and Under the Radar. So, Carys, how you doing?
I had a wonderful moment of human connection yesterday evening on the Victoria line.
That sounds promising.
I spotted a woman reading one of the romantasy books that you know I am fond of, aka Sexy Fairies.
Shagging fairies.
So she was reading the last book in the Achampong series, A Court of Thorns and Roses. We'll put it in the newsletter. And basically, a friend and I had also read that. We just went, great book to her. And then we spent the whole of our tube journey discussing how good the books were. And Gary, this woman had read no books last year and she's now read 5.
Wow.
There you go. The power of fiction and good fiction and escapism. And she said her partner's always asking why she's reading them. And she's like, I just need to get away from this reality. And I was like, I feel you.
Oh, God.
I think she was a good decade younger than me, but it was a really nice moment of human connection in these alienating and stressful times.
Like, because sometimes on the tube, if you strike up a conversation, people are like, don't fucking talk to me. I'm on the tube.
Who are you trying to chat to on the tube, Gary? Don't be doing that. What?
No, not like casual, like, good day, sir. What nice weather we're having. But, you know, did you like that book?
No, by and large, you can't do that. But this book is a cult. So,
yeah.
And she's a member of the cult. Although I am outing her as reading a sexy book on the tube, which she said she does get worried. But you can't tell from the cover.
I need some clarification here about these books. 1 minute they're romantic, the next minute they're sexy. Are these dirty books? I mean, like, how embarrassed should you be if you're caught reading them?
Well, the first thing is I'm not embarrassed at all about my books because I've been talking about them for some time. Yes. The literary industry, the publishing industry will call these books romantic fantasy. We've got to have a term, little jargon. But I have dubbed them sexy fairy books. It's an unofficial title that so far has not caught on. Maybe it will.
It has on this podcast. Thanks everyone for, doing the Lord's work. And that basically there's actually quite a range. And maybe I should do a social media post, although some of them are like young adult, snogging, fancying. And some of them, like Akatar, get pretty hot and heavy. I'll make a chart or some sort of a matrix or a scale. I actually think that could be quite useful as a resource. What about you? What have you been up to? Really felt so male. Now, my apologies to all the sex positive people out there using terms like filthy and dirty.
Yeah, that's true. You were sort of kink shaming there, sex shaming.
Yeah,
it's okay.
I know.
It's okay. The Lord's working on you, Gary.
I was partly responsible for a 12-year-old's birthday party.
Your 12-year-old, presumably.
My 12-year-old, yes. I wasn't just rocking up at a 12-year-old girl's party. Like, where's the pizza? But the energy, I have 2 brothers and I have a son who's older. So the energy of 12-year-old girls is something that, en masse, actually also individually, is just something that I wasn't quite prepared for.
Can you describe the energy?
Yeah, there was a movie play. It was in a church hall. It was a simulation of a sleepover.
Wait, what?
We had a sleepover party about 3 or 4 years ago for the birthday, and it was mental, and I wasn't going to do it again.
I see. I was like, is this some sort of like a high tech version of a sleepover? It was more just like, I don't want you people in my house, so we're not doing a sleepover. I
don't want all of you sleeping in my house, and I don't want all of that. And I became an ogre because I was like, you all have to shut up or go home. And the then 9-year-old girls weren't really feeling that. So I was in a church hall. A few hours in the evening, dress code, pajamas, bring blankets or sleeping bags or whatever. It was a place that had sofas, and we screened a movie, murder mystery thing with Jennifer Aniston and Adam Sandler. That was my daughter's choice. I would have gone for Grease, but
You'll always go for Greece, Gary.
I would always go for Greece. Then there was pizza, and you basically, the principle of running a party for kind of preteens is that you get them all hopped up on fizzy stuff and each other, and then you send them home.
To their parents. I see. Now, see, this is the evolution of the plan. I get it now. Before you did it and they had to stay in your house. Now you're like, and it's home time. Carriages.
They were lovely and as polite as you would want them to be. And, but it is a constant source of intrigue to me. I'm not going to lie, it was quite a lot of work.
Well, it's done for a year. And, it'll only get back to be 13 next time.
I know. And what I've heard is that 13 is a totally calm age.
Super easy,
no problems there.
Okay. Let's see what the listener's been saying. Someone has written in about potholes.
Yeah, potholes got you all talking over the week.
Thank you to Rebecca, who flagged an article that could be a solution to the problem of potholes. And we'll put it in the next newsletter from Positive News. And if you want to write in about 12-year-olds' birthdays, romantasy novels, always looking for recommendations, or anything else, you can find us all over social media, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook and X, and we are at over_under_pod_.
A big shout out to the people who joined us on Patreon recently, Marie, Samuel, and I think Ilesh,
Isaac, Ozzy, and Joe. We have 464 Patreon supporters now, and we have 430 fully fledged paying Patreon supporters. Thank you so much, all of you.
The team and I make this podcast. We believe there's an audience out there of people just like us, like you, who are being failed by the so-called mainstream media. And that audience consists of people who are comfortable with episodes that are both unashamedly progressive, but also have a sense of humor and irony, and try in our own little way to model how we might talk about the kind of things we talk about and stay sane.
Gary and I work with a small Black-owned production company to make this podcast, and most of the people working on it aren't currently paid for what we do. Because our values matter to us, we don't take random adverts. We only work with organizations whose values align with ours. So that makes your contributions extra important to keep the space alive.
We're up against the likes of Murdoch, BBC, The Guardian, The Rest is White People. So if you enjoy the pod and find value in what we do, please consider donating. The packages start at just £5 plus VAT a month. And if you're ready to donate, please consider upgrading your membership.
So the podcast will always be free, but if you donate to keep it going, you get some extra free stuff. You get a bonus episode, you get our weekly newsletter, and you get access to the exclusive Over Under WhatsApp community.
And what a community that is. Search Over the Top Under the Radar on Patreon, and please put your money where your ears are.
So, Gary, today I want to talk to you about the Spring Statement and net zero.
And I want to talk about the harassment of a Palestinian filmmaker and the American security industry and what that tells us about the priorities in the conversation about US foreign policy. My over the top for this week is about what should have been a secret conversation among the senior members of the Trump team about their plans to bomb Yemen, which were made public. Now, they did this on a platform called Signal. And for this, you want to think of Signal as like WhatsApp, but it's supposed to be more secure. Trouble is, it's not more secure if you include the editor-in-chief of a prominent magazine in that group. And that's what they did. So in this group, which includes Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, and a bunch of other heavyweights, they talk about plans to bomb Yemen. They talk about Europe's failings. You really get a sense of the arrogance of the Trump administration. They talk about, well, you know, this group that we're trying to bomb, which is the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis are an Islamist group that are promising to bomb both Israeli and American and other foreign vessels coming through that area, so long as the Israelis are occupying and bombing Gaza. They did actually stop some of that bombing during the ceasefire, and now they've started again. And in this group, you hear them talk about, well, it's only 3% of American trade, 40% of European trade. The Europeans are pathetic. Sick of bailing them out, says J.D. Vance. Hegseth says they're pathetic. They talk about like whether Americans will understand this or whether they want to do some prep. It's really gung-ho. It's really, really blokey. After they bomb Yemen, one of them puts an emoji, it's a fist, and then a flag, then fire. And the reason that this is over the top is obviously this is a problem, but the lion's share of the media conversation with this has been about, was this a breach? How was it a breach? Who's to blame? It's been entirely solipsistic. And it's like, hang on, can we talk about the 53 people that you killed, according to the Yemen Ministry of Health, about the 98 people who they say were injured, about what this is actually doing in Yemen. The reports from Al Jazeera, it's one of the few organizations that's still actually doing a lot of reporting from there, is that every time that they bomb this, it actually strengthens the Houthis. And, you know, is there some other way of engaging this apart from just bombing the crap out of people? Does it show you're strong? Is this effective? Bearing in mind that when there was a ceasefire, the bombing did stop. Now, the Houthis, pretty awful. Their slogan is something like, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam. It's like, they're not exactly subtle. And so we shouldn't be regarding them as allies. They're Iranian-backed. And Yemenis are people too. And actually what we're seeing in this bombing is the logic of how groups like that become popular. So my over the top is about the way in which the media is so focused solipsistically on the internal, who knew what, when, who should resign, blah, blah, blah. Not that that is not important, but the degree to which they have missed, like, well, what the fuck are they doing? And who are they doing it to? What was the impact of this thing? Where is this going? It's like, oh yeah, there was some bombing. Anyway, back to the drama. So that's my over the top.
I do think part of the reason this is an important story is that if we can cast our minds back to the first time Trump became president, quite a lot of fuss made about Hillary Clinton using a private email server. And these guys are doing the same, arguably not worse, by using Signal instead of a secure, approved means of government communication. So like, I don't know. It's so exhausting being in the midst of another Trump presidency. But I think the hypocrisy is important because I think it's important for us to remember that most of what this administration says is what serves it in its moment. And it's like the equivalent of a parent who's like, do as I say, not as I do. When push came to shove, they downloaded, yes, one of the more secure messaging apps to their phones to have a conversation about bombing, which just isn't allowed. And anyone who's read the story or watched anything about this story will know there are very specific technological solutions set up. People have secure lines installed in their homes to have conversations of this nature. And whilst I don't generally want to sit around defending the security services of the United States, like those exist for a reason. And Signal is mega secure. It doesn't hold data, but like you could lose your phone. You could be in Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or another American supermarket, drop your Signal conversation, or as we found out, add a journalist. So I think like it is important to talk about the wild security violations given Donald Trump came into office saying that Hillary Clinton should be jailed for using a private email server. Also not great behavior. And then I think the other thing about this story for me is when it first broke. So when the journalist who, and let's be clear, like obviously I was all up in this with my popcorn for the tea and the drama. I love Elite WhatsApp or Signal group. I love also the wrong person is added into the chat. And I think the human interest part of that we can agree with. But I think the bit that for me was also the most chilling, other than not really talking about the people who were killed in Yemen, was that when this story first broke, JD Vance's office were most concerned with the fact that he'd been slightly rude about Trump in the group chat. So at one point, JD Vance is like, I don't think Trump knows where this place is. I don't think he actually knows that most of our trade doesn't go through the Suez Canal. So I don't think he fully understands what we're about to do. And when the story breaks, his main reaction was to sort of make sure the president knew that he backed him and that he wasn't talking smack about the president. And you're like, okay, so you're more worried that Trump will read this and be pissed with you than the fact that you're planning bombings on your phone. Great. Yeah, it feels like a huge missed opportunity to talk about foreign policy, but it is also just mind-boggling, right? That this is real life.
Well, yeah. I mean, my point isn't that they shouldn't talk about all of that other stuff. It's that they just don't talk about Yemen. I mean, the impact of this bombing in the original piece gets
nothing,
a line or so. And I understand that Signal has a different level of security. Although, as I said, that's not much use to if you were going to include journalists in it. But that to see this stuff being played out on what beyond that technology is basically WhatsApp. So to see people just kind of, you can imagine them in the car or whatever, being yeah, let's, emojis as foreign policy and as military policy, the kind of casual nature in which they talk about killing people and bombing places and the world, strategic. You just have this image. I know none of them use public transport, but them being on a bus or whatever and being yeah, I could do bombing. Yeah. What, 7:00? Yeah, let's go for it. And one of the things that we learn from this, or not learn, but is these people are pretty thick.
Such a sort of trivial phone in your pocket platform is bananas. And I guess it does reflect badly on all of us. Although I'd say worse on those that voted for them.
What's your over for the week?
My over the top is probably the other big story that is in the headlines this week, which is the spring statement. It's not a budget, Gary. It's a spring statement. Are you aware of the difference?
No. Both of them seem to hammer poor people. So
it's not super clear. It used to be that Gordon Brown, because he liked his moment in the sun and he was always beefing Tony Blair, would have a March budget and an autumn statement. So they had two moments to talk about the economy and seem, weighty and serious. Rachel Reeves, as I'm sure we all remember, did a fiscal statement that was kind of a budget in October and a spring statement. It seems to be all of a nonsense, Gary. Write in if you think there's a meaningful difference, but it was a statement about the economy. We got Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts, not great, for growth or poverty. And we got some policy announcements that had already been trailed. I'm going to steal your sort of line about this was political theatre, and as ever, it got a ton of coverage, even though there wasn't much new announced. And if we look at the substance of any of the things that are being announced, the short version is the plan that Labour got elected on, fiscal rules, lots of growth, ... everything will be amazing, has changed because, and this is a phrase, if anyone's been consuming the news this week, they'll have heard a lot, because Rachel Reeves' headroom has run out. So the money she thought she had, because the OBR says growth is going to be smaller than we thought, the headroom's run out. So we've got to batten down the hatches and, spoiler alert, not a huge surprise, tighten the belts of poor people, cut loads of civil servants, and do a ton of things that sound and feel like austerity, but are apparently not austerity. So yeah, I think my over the top, I'm over the spring statement and I'm over the coverage of it for a few reasons. One, I don't like the name. Let's just go back to having budgets. I don't get it. Rachel, if there's a reason, please write in. Two, I think for me, it really sums up what is so disappointing and frustrating about how this Labour government sees the economy. Rachel Reeves created these fiscal rules. So she tied her own hands behind her back in the run up to the general election about not raising taxes, about debt and spending. The rules don't work and the economic context has changed. So rather than getting rid of her fiscal rules and reevaluating the plan, we're like contorting ourselves in knots and like cutting more from a state that's already been cut to the bone over a decade so that she can keep her fiscal rules. And I think this is like a fundamental misunderstanding of why people voted Labour. People voted Labour because they were sick of the Tories and they thought and hoped that Labour might do something about our terrible public services. They didn't vote Labour because of Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules, which if you walk out on the street and ask 100 people, probably none of them are going to know what they are other than bloody Rachel. If you want an example of what you can do, if you don't tie your hands behind your back, you just need to look at Germany. The Bundestag has just voted with a 2/3 majority to loosen its debt brake. So the German economy has rules to prevent excessive spending, but German politicians have looked at the economic climate and decided that it's okay to get into more debt and it's okay to break their economic rules in order to stimulate the economy, in order to invest in defense and infrastructure and climate change. The rules aren't working, so the people in charge of the country change them. This spending, some of it will go on defense, some of it will go on bridges and roads, some of it will go on climate change measures because the German Greens have lobbied for them. The German economy is very averse when it comes to debt for good reasons to do with their economic history. But they've looked at the lay of the land and been like, this isn't working. We need to do something different. So that's why I'm over, Gary. It's driving me bananas and I can't handle it. And the number of people, I don't know if anyone else has got people posting to social media who are about to have their benefits cut or their child's benefits cut or a partner's benefits cut and talking about how scared they are. That's the dark side of this, that people's lives are going to be a lot harder because of a failure of imagination or cowardice. I don't know which it is. Maybe you have an opinion.
I mean, it has to be cowardice, doesn't it? Because you have to really work hard to imagine that rules that you've made up are more important than people who you are pauperizing. I mean, that is insane. And to me, the way in which not all of the media, but enough of the media kind of work within the parameters of those rules, as opposed to saying, well, these rules are obviously jacked up. And aren't going to work and should be scrapped. And well, there's a couple of things. The first, for me, is the degree to which all of those people who laid into Labour when it had its left turn, I want to know where they are now and what they've got to say for themselves. When Labour went down in flames in 2019, I and others wrote, not exactly a mea culpa. I'm not in the Labour Party and I run the Labour Party, but look, we support this project and it's been rejected and we have to kind of, we have to work with that. But actually, the lion's share of the media, they've waded in on this project. What have they got to say about this? Where is this? They should be owning this. And to the extent that they own this, not saying like, well, who knew? It's like, well, you should have done. You actively promoted this kind of agenda and the limited ideological space that we could move in. So limited that the center-right party wins in Germany and they have a kind of more robust understanding of this and a more progressive understanding of this than the British Labour Party. And the other is just that kind of the politics of it are awful. And I don't know whether they think, oh, well, we'll figure it all out in the next couple of years, but they're not really running the show. To a large degree with these rules, they've put everything on autopilot. Well, computer says, no, sorry, you can't have that heating, that food, that this, that. And they have an opportunity in this moment, thanks to Trump and Ukraine and what's going on in Ukraine because of Trump and what's going on with tariffs because of Trump to say, you know what? These are supposed to be the most pragmatic people. That's who they're supposed to be. That whole, like, we care about what works, not about what's right. And, you know, trouble with the left is that they're all full of ideas. And the world has changed since they were elected. That is their get out. These ideas were shit before, but now they have a get out. The world has changed. Tariffs, Ukraine, military, probably a jack up in oil prices and so on and so forth. And we have to change with it. And everybody's going to have to do their part. The richer people are going to have to pay their part. There is a kind of clear way through this that doesn't just say, yeah, well, we said that in the election and now so what? And they won't do that. Instead, fucking captain of the Titanic, forward to the iceberg. It's terrible.
I believe that when this Labour government goes back to the polls in 4 or 5 years, if our public institutions are not in better shape, if the NHS is still crumbling, if a ton of people have been made poorer and driven into poverty, that's not hyperbole, that's OBR predictions, then people will blame Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer for it. So, like, it's the wrong thing to do. It's not the smart thing to do. And I don't think they can win an election on this. I think they hand the election to Nigel Farage. And that's a problem for all of us. So yeah, it's frustrating, the actual spring statement. And then it's frustrating, the cookie cutter media coverage of OBR charts and bloody headroom. And it's a failure of imagination. Imagine, you know, being in charge of one of the biggest economies in the world and just being the first woman to be Chancellor of the United Kingdom and spending all your time trying to squeeze money out of people on disability benefits. Like, it's a failure of imagination more than anything else. And to your point, like, these are extraordinary times. What's the Harold Millen quote? Events, dear boy, events. Like, even more shit's going to kick off in the next few years. And we actually need a Chancellor and a government that are going to be thinking about the macroeconomy in a much more expansive way. Gary, what's been flying under the radar for you this week?
Well, it depends on your radar, but I don't think it has got the news coverage that it deserves, certainly, which starts with a small village in the West Bank called, sorry if I got this wrong, Susia, and settlers, so Israeli settlers who have moved into occupied territories. These are already territories that Israel shouldn't be in. And then what happens is people come sometimes from Israel, sometimes from Brooklyn, some from all over the world, actually. And they say, you know what? All of this area is ours, and we are going to take this place. And then they just kind of move in and they settle there. And then many of them harass local people. So some of the settlers, Israeli settlers, come to this Palestinian village, Susia, armed with batons and knives. At least one of them's holding an M16. This is according to witnesses. They are accompanied by soldiers and they start stoning houses and harassing people. Now, to that point, kind of so far so normal. This stuff is normalized now in that area. Settler violence is a major, major problem in the occupied territories, particularly in the West Bank, because the settlers were moved out of Gaza. But the person in particular that they are targeting is a guy called Hamdan Balal. And Hamdan Balal was one of the filmmakers who made No Other Land, which won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature Film this year. And that film chronicles the struggle of residents in Masafa Yatta, which is another area of the West Bank, as they try to stop the Israeli military from demolishing their villages. The film won a bunch of awards, starting in Berlin. It's been controversial, particularly once it won. So in Miami Beach, the local mayor tried to stop the end of the lease of a cinema that was screening it. So these settlers come in, they're looking for Hamdan Balal. They find him as he is trying to protect his family from the stonings. They beat him up. They handcuff him, they blindfold him, the soldiers do, and he is led away bleeding from the head to a military vehicle. He's put in jail overnight with 2 other Palestinians. They're released that spent the night on the floor. It's shown that they've suffered serious injuries sustained in the attack. He's bruises on his face, blood on his clothes. So here's the thing about this. First of all, there is the ongoing occupation and set of violence, which happens whether there's a ceasefire in Gaza or not. It is quote unquote become normal in that neck of the woods. And just because it's normal doesn't mean it's acceptable. It's not acceptable. It's actually against international law. It was against Israeli law. It's an outrage. Secondly, and once again, generally, this violence against storytellers and journalists. There was another young man who was killed in Gaza. They are, by most accounts, targeting journalists and story makers. And these are the people, it's the stories that they're trying to kill. And in order to do that, they have to kill the journalists and the story makers. They don't want people to know. And they don't want us to see Palestinians as human beings, I believe, for better and for worse, not just as victims, not just as perpetrators, if we look at October the 7th, but as human beings who love and live and cry and engage and are trying to kind of make their life. So they kill the people who are telling the stories. Generally speaking, the journalist fraternity gets very upset about this when journalists are killed. And it's really interesting the level of silence that there has been around this. But then specifically about Hamdan Bilal, the documentary that he did, which was a co-production with Israelis, was exactly what they say they want, or what a significant section of liberals say they want. This is Palestinians and Israelis, Muslims and Jews, working together, telling a story together about their shared story. And that is no protection. Half the time when I listen to the way that certain people talk about Israel and Palestine, I think like what you want are Israelis to be different and Palestinians to be different. And you're not going to get that. This is the world that we live in. Here is an endeavor which is somewhat different, which is kind of, breaking through and so on. It doesn't make any difference. It's not that I thought, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing it to him. It's more kind of, you see, they keep talking about like, well, where is Palestine's Nelson Mandela? Where is Palestine's peacemaker? And it's like, well, you keep killing him. You keep beating him up. You keep undermining him or her. You don't allow that political culture to flourish. And here is another example. Oh, this is a cultural issue rather than just a boldly political one. And then the final one, and this works beyond Palestine, beyond the Middle East, is the clear indication that success is no protection. Indeed, it could well make you more vulnerable. It looks like they targeted him. You can win an Oscar. They'll still come for you. You can play football for your country. You miss a penalty, you missed it because you're black. You succeed well enough to be the head of Harvard, you're a DEI hire. Here are people who, on any standard, have known success. And it is proof, if proof be needed, that that success is no protection. That the anti-Palestinian racism to which we refer, it does what it says on the packet. It discriminates against Palestinians regardless. You'd think that the people that gave them the Oscar would protest in some way. But there has been no public support from the US Academy for Hamdan Bilal. The European Academy voiced support. Other award groups and festivals have done. But the US Academy, according to one report, they said that other Palestinians were beaten up in a settler attack. It could be considered unrelated to the film, so they felt no need to respond. Where are these people when you need them? What does it mean to get a US Academy Award? What does it mean to get an Oscar if that can put a target on your back? People can attack you and then they will say nothing. It is absolutely both shameful and indicative and illustrative of where we are at the moment.
I knew about him winning the Oscar, but I didn't know about him being beaten up and arrested. Yeah, it's a terrible story. And I think it's funny, isn't it? Another thing that right-wing people do is they're often dismissive of the arts and, cut arts funding and see all of this stuff as a waste. But the reality is that good art and storytellers and creatives are incredibly powerful. And yeah, that's why people try to silence them or beat them up or arrest them. Yeah, just completely awful and chilling. And yes, I think you're right. Are there many nations, are there many nationalities where having the visibility of winning an Academy Award wouldn't provide you any protection? Yeah, just really grim.
What's your under the radar?
My under the radar is serious but more ridiculous, which is Kemi Badenoch's speech about net zero. So she actually gave the speech a week ago. I got some headlines from the right-wing press when she gave it, but because I'm a very cool and interesting person, I watched the speech this week and I don't think it's getting enough coverage. Or at least the right things aren't getting enough coverage. For those who don't know, Kemi Badenoch is the leader of the Conservative Party, fairly recently elected, friend of the podcast maybe, we talk about it quite a lot, and former government minister. This will be relevant. And so last week she gave a speech in a very kind of chic white blouse, hair back in a bun. She means business about net zero policy. So net zero is cutting our carbon dioxide emissions so that we can slow and not stop climate change. The UK has been a pioneer. We had the Climate Change Act. We have a target of getting to net zero by 2050. Kemi's speech, which, as I say, got coverage in like the Daily Mail, the Times and the Telegraph, is pretty bananas, and it's pretty terrifying because she is undoing a political consensus that we've had in the UK, which is that climate change is real and we should do something about it. The speech itself, I would not recommend you watch or read. It's vintage Kemi. Like, it begins by talking about, how terrible everything is in the UK and energy prices are too high and, the great promise of this nation isn't being fulfilled. And then she pins all of the blame for these many problems on the UK's net zero policy. She also makes a number of claims that just aren't true. So she says that we have no plan to get to net zero, like provably false. We have extensive plans to get to net zero. Lots of smart people have worked on them for years, including Conservatives. She also says it's impossible to get to net zero without bankrupting us. And no one knows why the target is for net zero by 2050. I won't go on. And, some wonderful organizations like Carbon Brief have taken the time to rigorously fact check her. I mean, she could have fact checked herself using Google. Like, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, thousands of scientists have explained why we need to reach net zero and why the current timelines are important. They will not stop climate change, but they will reduce the extent to which the Earth is warming. So this speech from Kemi is undoing that consensus, is tacking to the right and trying to sort of be like Nigel Farage. It's also toxifying the term net zero, which is long-term dangerous. I don't think we're talking enough about the fact that the main opposition party in the UK has rowed back on more than a decade of political consensus. We're nearly 10 years on from the Paris Accords, where most countries in the world committed to taking action on climate change. We still haven't had the action we need, but arguing that like the action isn't possible or feasible and will bankrupt us is not just wrong, it's dangerous. Kemi also, in a kind of grumpy old man way, talks a lot about how energy bills are too high. They are, and claims that climate policies are driving up the cost of energy. Again, this is provably false and dangerous. The cost of electricity is not because we care about climate change or are taking minimal actions to tackle it. We face high electricity prices because we are exposed to global markets, because gas prices are high because of the war in Ukraine. So she's lying. She's dismantling a political consensus. she's tacking further to the right and sort of yet again moving the political center of gravity towards reform. And I don't think we've had enough coverage about it in the press, or the fact that one of her big campaign backers runs an anti-net zero campaign group.
We are in that weird place where just because people are saying crazy stuff doesn't mean that we can ignore it, because this crazy stuff soon then becomes either policy or consensus. And the higher it gets, the more seriously we are asked to take it. Because the things that she says here, while I did not know the speech had taken place, I wasn't aware. But at a certain point, it becomes like arsenic in the water supply of our conversation, and it just kind of seeps through. And then suddenly, and this used to happen in America a lot, you think you're having a conversation with someone, and it turns out that they are using entirely different facts. So in 2008, I remember being in Roanoke, Virginia, and Republicans telling me that the financial crisis was caused by Clinton's policy of making it easier for black people to buy houses. And that's what had caused. And as far as they knew, that was true. That was their truth. So the degree to which the lying, the manipulation of facts, because we already have a media that does this, right? We already have a media that, as a result of the media, people think there are 4 times as many Muslims or twice as many immigrants as there actually are. We already have a media which distorts and creates problems that are disproportionate. Once you have political leaders who are doing a similar thing, in this case with climate change, but it could be about anything, then you're into really dangerous territory, because people just stop believing anything.
Yeah. And I think, again, it comes back to something we talk about, that comes up a lot on this podcast, which is facts and figures are all well and good, but so much of politics and political reality is the story that you tell. No one will remember the OBR forecast. Probably very few people know them now. But if the only people being vocal and being amplified are telling you that your living standards are bad because of action on climate change, and it's amplified by the right-wing media, it originates from people like Nigel Farage. And I'm sure if we followed the money, we could track it back to the people that are funding these parties. But if the only story in town is net zero is to blame for your living standards, net zero is to blame for stagnant growth, and there is no other story, then it's obvious what people end up believing. And just to be clear, right now, 69% of people in the UK are concerned about climate change, and 61% of them support the net zero target. But as a result of people like Nigel Farage and people like Kemi jumping on the bandwagon, there is a growing skepticism that governments will reach their targets. And this is one of those ones where you get into self-fulfilling prophecies. We have to not just believe in climate change, but believe that action is possible in order to make sure the planet will exist. And yeah, I wish that journalists were talking more about that and less about maybe, Donald Trump's text exchange. Although I was intrigued by the use of emoji. I'm always interested by how people use emoji, Gary. It says a lot about them.
I think the thing of foreign policy by emoji is a really intriguing one, but that's where we are. Thank you for listening to Over the Top and Under the Radar.
Remember to subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support the show, you can find us on the Patreon website by searching Over the Top Under the Radar.
You can sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com and connect with us on socials at over_under_pod_.
We will see you next week.